ready?
Yeah, let's go.
All right. Welcome back to the Common Sense Medicine podcast with your host, Dr. Timothy Chen. I'm your co-host, Michael Abernathy. And today is kind of the last content episode that we will have in the weight loss series. This is kind of a bonus episode.
Yeah.
Because it's not... I mean, it goes into the behavioral stuff, but I kind of figure like this is the bonus episode. So
Yeah.
tell us what we're talking about today.
Well, yeah. So today we're actually talking about tracking, which I think is very, very useful because there's a million devices out there, right?
Yeah.
From literally the past 5 years, the watches have gotten more advanced. People have heart rate monitors. People have apps to track all sorts of things. And we're going to go a little bit in depth of like, what should you track? Should you track? You know, what's the point of tracking? And maybe how does that affect behavior if it does?
Yeah. Well, do you track anything?
I usually track my exercise progress. So I use the app. I don't track my food. I don't track my water intake. Probably should track my water intake. But yeah, but as far as tracking, I usually do it only for the exercise side.
Okay. What do you like to do, like as far as your tracking for that?
So I usually have an app that essentially you generate the workouts that you want. And so it generates it. And then as you lift each week, it adjusts what you should do.
Okay.
And so, and then again, at the end, you get these fancy charts of this is where you started. This is the weights that you were lifting. You're doing the same exercise. You've increased X amount of percent. So it's one of those things that for me, it's like, oh, okay, I lifted more than I thought I did. And it was much more helpful than before I did it because I could go to the gym for like a month and still lift the exact same weight.
Yeah. Well, I'm laughing because I basically created that in Excel last year and give it out to people sometimes to help track that. But it does all that where it like calculates based on your performance last week, what you should do next week. And I didn't put any graphs in there, but that's a good idea. Man, I'm in the wrong business, man. These apps.
That's right. You can make a killing because they're all subscriptions now.
Yeah.
And again, I didn't use to track before, but you realize like, you don't really know, like the next week you come back to the same exercise. You're like, I thought I lifted more than this. I didn't. And sometimes I'll be lifting and the track was like, today you're doing this. I'm like, there's no way I'm doing that. And then it looks up, but last week you did this. I was like, I didn't do that last week, And so anyway,
it really helps you because we're really bad with remembering certain things. And it helps to, put that on paper so that you can refer back to it and kind of help guide you. And we'll get there because tracking is essentially a guide.
Yeah.
And so when we are talking about weight loss, we're going to talk about two kind of primary things to track. And I mean, there are other things, but we're going to talk about tracking food intake and tracking your weight.
Yes.
And so when we say tracking food intake, what people are probably hearing is counting calories.
Right.
But that counting calories is like one way to track your food. It's not the only way. And it kind of varies on, what level of depth are you willing to go to? What do you enjoy? Do you like putting things into a tracker app or whatever? Or do you like taking pictures, right?
Yeah.
So for tracking food, I have like 5 things written down. And then one of them is counting calories. And then you can go to a different level of depth there with counting macronutrients. The simplest form is probably, and I probably should have started with this and gone down in increasing difficulty, but just keeping a journal, like just writing the food down, right? Not worried about portion sizes, just writing what you eat on a piece of paper or something, or in a note on your phone, right? Another one is taking pictures of your phone. And they have apps now where you can take a picture of your food and it will use algorithms and will use the buzzword AI to kind of give you an estimate of the calories and all that for it. So you don't have to do any of that stuff. You just take a picture and it does it. Now it cannot possibly be perfect,
right?
But it's probably good enough, and we'll explain why. But I mean, if you like to take pictures, that's a good way to log it.
Yeah.
And the other one is just kind of recording portion sizes. So, I mean, that one's pretty simple. How much did you put on your plate? How much, did you use a measuring cup? Did you weigh it out? And it's not necessarily about getting within a certain parameter. Like I have to have this many or that much. You just track it and keep track of it. So there's no intention behind that, but we'll get to the intention in a minute.
Yeah. Well, and I think for most people, if they're pretty serious about wanting to lose weight, you don't have to track forever, but I think at least in the beginning, it's very, very helpful for us to visualize what we're actually putting in our body.
Yeah.
Right.
It's all about raising awareness of our behaviors, and we will get to that in a minute. But I want to talk about logging weight.
Yeah.
Because on top of logging your food, I guess you could track your exercise too, but we're going to focus on tracking your food or tracking your weight. Mm-hmm. And so that's a little bit more straightforward. It's you step on the scale, it logs your weight. However, as we've discussed like at length during this series, weight by itself may not be the best measure of your success, especially if you're doing strength training or building muscle or doing that kind of stuff, because as you build muscle, that muscle is more dense. Your weight may go up.
Right.
Or not move, but that doesn't mean that you're not making progress because it's not necessarily about the weight. It's about what the weight is made of, right?
Correct.
So your body composition, your body fat percentage versus your lean mass, right? And so I was actually talking to a patient recently who said he summarized it by going, so it's not about the number on the scale, but what's on the scale. I'm like, yeah, that's really good.
Go write that down.
Yeah, I did. I wrote it down. I included it in this episode because it was so good. I'm like, I don't know why I've never worded it that way, but it's pretty simple. It's not about the number on the scale. It's what's on the scale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and I think you're right. There are fancier scales. You can get things that do calculate a body fat. And again, they're not 100%, but they're they're good enough. Yeah.
Yeah, they're close enough. And so there are a couple other ways to record weight. So obviously the scale, if you want to go a little bit more in depth and get those body fat percentages, which may be a little bit more helpful in guiding you, you can get those scales that do that. You could do an in-body scan, which is kind of, it uses bioelectrical impedance, which is electrical signals that it sends it up through your feet and, out your other foot. And it measures the resistance because fat, water, muscle, bone, it all has different densities and resistances to electrical signal, right? So it measures the resistance and then estimates your body fat percentage that way. And that's how the ones that you use at home work too. They're sending electricity up through your foot, your right foot, and then it goes back in the left foot, and it just measures the difference between what it sends out and what it gets back.
Right.
Fun fact.
Yeah.
And then I think body fat calipers is kind of a simpler one where you just do skin folds, you pinch your skin, you measure the millimeters or whatever. Yeah. That gives you a pretty good indicator of body fat. And then DEXA scans, which are a lot more expensive and complicated, but they're probably the gold standard for figuring out your body composition.
Yeah.
And so all of those things can be logged in addition to the weight to give you a much more accurate picture of what that weight means and all of that. But for the purposes of raising awareness, if you're doing behaviors, and I'll repeat this later, but if you're, putting behaviors in place like exercise and eating correctly or, eating healthy, and you're just tracking the number on the scale, a lot of times you can expect that number to go down if you're doing everything right. And if you're not, then you know that something that you're doing probably isn't in the right place or where it needs to be.
Yes.
And so what the number does is it kind of gives you a marker of how are we doing?
Right.
Are the things we're doing leading to the results that we're seeking? And if not, we need to change that. And we'll get into that process. But I wanted to say a couple other things that you could track in addition to food or our weight would be hunger, physical activity, which we talked about at the beginning, and then stress levels, which are all part of the weight loss journey. So keeping track of that and kind of using those as guides. Again, this is like your GPS for your weight loss journey is tracking.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and again, I think this is a good part to put this in because, tracking, like you said with GPS, this is giving you data, right? Giving lots of data about what you're doing, what things are coming in. But at the end of the day, if we don't do anything with the data, we're like, it's like if the GPS says turn left, you're like, great, go straight. That GPS did 0 for you. Yeah. Right.
Well, I use this, the GPS thing, because I was thinking about it in terms of like, if you go to Google Maps or whatever, or you use your Apple Maps, and you just put in your destination, but the thing has no idea where you are.
Right.
Or like where you're starting from. It cannot possibly draw you a map to your destination. It can just give you a circle and be like, there it is.
Yeah.
It's like, well, how, that doesn't do me any good.
Correct.
Like, where am I and what roads do I need to take to get there? Like, it's great that you're showing me the end.
Right.
Also, how do we get there?
Yeah.
And so tracking, or at least your weight, kind of gives you that, well, here's where we are. And so a goal would be where are we trying to get to?
Yeah.
And then tracking kind of helps you to steer in the right path, and carve your path, I guess.
Yeah.
But let's shift over a little bit and then kind of get into that. What do we do with the data?
Correct.
And it all comes down to the behavior change. And so why would we need to log our food in the first place? And it's just the logging, the tracking is just a tool we can use for that feedback to raise awareness about our daily habits. And we've talked about this a lot, but I'm going to go through the behavior change roadmap.
Yeah.
Roadmap.
I like that. We're on a good theme right now.
We got a theme going. Okay, so the first step is defining an objective. And so that's where we go, what is our why, right? We're establishing the purpose. What are we trying to do and why? So that's number one, define the objective. Number two is set the goals. And so that's where you think about, okay, I want to get healthy because, I want to lose weight because, and here are the goals that I'm looking to get so that objective is accomplished. 3 is developing an action plan. How are we going to get there? Putting the plan in place. Are we going to do this diet or that diet? Are we going to do this exercise program or that one? It's just kind of weighing all the options, going through the first 12 episodes of this series and putting the action plan together. And step 4 is where the rubber hits the road. It's implementation of the action, right? Step 5 is self-monitoring. Step 6 is feedback evaluation. 7 is revision and application. And 8 is outcome assessment.
Yeah.
So then finally, step 9, and I know that's a lot of steps, but we'll kind of simplify it to what we need to focus on. Step 9 is implementing the next actions.
Yeah.
Okay. And so if you think going from step 4 to step 9, this is a classic feedback loop, right? So you take action, you self-monitor and gather data about the actions or the outcomes from those actions. You look at the data and analyze it to kind of add context to it and figure out, what does this data mean? So that's the feedback part. And then that feedback gives you awareness about what you did in your actions that led to that. So then once you kind of have an idea of, where you are, what you were doing, how that led to where you are, you can then reflection, and say, okay, am I heading in the right direction or am I heading in the wrong direction? And then if you're heading in the right direction, you go, okay, we're going to keep doing what we're doing, and you go straight to action. But if you're not and things are not working out, then you can say, okay, well, now I need to reevaluate what I'm doing, make a change, and then implement those actions.
Yeah.
And you start that all over again. You go right back to step 1, action. We're doing stuff. We monitor. We look at the data and see where we're going, figure out, what that means and what we need to change, and we just keep doing it.
Yeah.
And it's a never ending cycle, really.
Yeah.
But that's it. So,
well, and I think, again, this is the part where I usually talk to patients, and if they're doing something, let's say they're like, hey, I calculated my stuff and I said my basal metabolic calorie count is 2,500 or something, whatever, they do some kind of calculator. And so they're eating their calories at 2,500, but they're not losing any weight. Usually either people are like, give up, I'm never making my destination. But what we're saying with this feedback loop and this tracking is like, okay, if we're not getting to where we want to be, we need to either evaluate, maybe it's not 2,500. Maybe we're either overeating, right? Maybe we're eating 2,800 when we're thinking 2,500. So the tracking can be helpful. Or our basal metabolic rate isn't 2,500. It's really 2,000. And so we're above, right? And so this is where that constant tweaking when we're not getting where we want to be is helpful.
Yeah. So there's a couple things to unpack there. And the first one, I want to go back to episode 1, energy balance. So all of your watches, your phones, they develop energy levels. So like, how many calories do you need? They do that based on equations that are just estimates.
Yeah.
They're pretty good at a population level, but they can vary pretty wildly at an individual level. And so they serve as a starting point. That's it. That is as good as it gets, is a starting point. And if you don't deviate from the starting point based on the results you get, you're never going to get anywhere.
Right.
And so, like you said, if you set it at 2,500 because your phone told you 2,500 and you eat 2,500 and you don't lose weight, that means that, even if you gain weight, I mean, that means you're probably looking at a different number. And so you need to adjust the number. If your weight didn't move and you did that for like 3 weeks, then you need to drop it down to like 2,250 and then see what happens. Because I guarantee you, eventually you're going to drop it enough to start seeing some movement.
Correct.
And so that doesn't mean that the energy balance doesn't work. It just means that the equation didn't predict your needs correctly.
Correct.
And there are a lot of reasons for that.
Absolutely.
And another thing to unpack is the fact that we are really bad about underestimating our calorie intake and overestimating our energy output. And so that just makes it a lot more difficult. And even with tracking, a lot of times, if you like I eat at the cafeteria at work sometimes. I don't have labels for that. I don't have recipes. So I have to just do the best I can to estimate what it is that I'm eating, right? You can't be 100% accurate with that.
Right.
If everything you eat is in a package, that's easy. You just scan the package and you're good to go. But like for stuff like eating at the cafeteria, you just do the best you can. And so we're likely underestimating those calories and then overeating in other places because we think we have that buffer, right? So if you're being really, really consistent with things, those instances where you're just kind of doing your best should even themselves out over the average over time. And so minor discrepancies like that are not a big thing as long as you're fairly consistent with and accurate with other things. But we'll talk about why the level of accuracy probably doesn't really matter that much when it comes to guiding us. Like it can lead to better success, but it doesn't need to be done super detailed to be successful with tracking.
Yeah. And again, I think that's to kind of piggyback on what you said, like this is a method that will work if we're consistent with it, but we always have to be consistent with our input and our output. Like we have to be consistent with what we're logging, how honest we are with our login, right? Like sometimes we're like, oh, I didn't, those extra 2 nuggets and my kids didn't finish, I just popped them in. I'm not going to log that. Those things all over a long time can start adding up. So again, if you're not seeing the results that you want, even if you have some kind of if you have diabetes or you have polycystic ovary, like things that we know might affect insulin resistance, the math will still work if we get in a deficit. So it might not be what we calculated on a computer, but like you said, you have to experiment sometimes by, okay, I'm at 2,500. That's what the computer said. I've got the disease. Maybe it's just not meant to be. I'm like, no, it's still meant to be. You just have to readjust the numbers that you're seeing. And
that's kind of hard because it's easier to follow a plan that's written for you, right? Because a lot of times we don't have confidence in ourselves to come up with the plan ourselves. And when we have to start adjusting the numbers ourselves, that kind of, we're like, that can't be right because the computer is obviously right or they wouldn't have it there. Right. We have to understand what that means, and you adjusting the numbers is the only way that you're going to be successful. Like you have to take an active role in managing this stuff. If you just let the computer do it, it's not going to do a great job of it. Right. So I'll just throw that out there. Absolutely. So we're at a question where, does dietary self-monitoring lead to greater weight loss? So does it help? And overwhelmingly and consistently, yes. And so there's a 2021 systematic review that looked at 59 studies with over 19,000 people, and over 60% of the studies showed that the self-monitoring groups lost significantly more weight than the groups that did not monitor. And so on average, the self-monitoring groups lost 3.5 times the weight of the control groups. Wow.
Significant.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot. That's like if the group that didn't track over the same amount of time lost 10 pounds, the group that did track lost 35 pounds. Yeah. Like that's a lot.
That's huge.
So it does help. The thing that we need to consider is what helps us to get to that point where tracking is is needed, or that we can do it. Because if you remember a while back, we were talking about finding that why and the underlying motivation, that purpose for why we're doing what we're doing. That has to be really strong for you to be really successful. And so that same thing can be applied to tracking. Tracking is not something that's really easy to do in the beginning. It does get easier as you do it. But you kind of have to have a need to track, a strong objective and purpose and why. But yeah, I lost my place.
You're good.
Hang on. We'll edit this part out. I'll just give you a job to do.
Okay.
But yeah, let me find my place here.
Okay.
Okay. So, so 3.5 times the weight. Basically individuals that tracked consistently and then received some form of guidance, whether that was coaching or, using the app to help recommend feedback and stuff like that. And have that action plan where they're actually implementing those actions, are significantly more likely to progress towards their goal.
Yeah.
And like we said, it's not easy to do. And even people that do start, it tends to decline over time. And people who start seeing success with tracking, it's just like any other behavior change. Like even if your diet, like you get on your diet, you're seeing success, you get off your diet, you regain the weight.
Correct.
The studies show the same thing with tracking. If you use tracking as a tool to get you to the weight that you want to be at, and then you stop, you're just super likely to regain the weight.
Yeah.
So it's the same exact thing over and over and over, which is why that consistency and doing things in ways that are sustainable is so important. Because the moment you start pulling the plug, you're just going to come right back.
Yeah. We tell patients this ad nauseum, right? Like I've had some patients who were very successful. They got their diabetes completely under control. Medicine's working, diet's working. They stop the medicine, they stop the diet, everything explodes again.
Celebrate.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did it. We killed it.
Yeah. No, these things are, again, lifelong things that we're learning. And so, last episode and the previous episode, what we realized is if we can somehow automate the habit that made this easy, once it becomes a habit and it's automated, then the sustainability actually works.
Yeah. And so that's like, I'll tell you about my tracking. I use MyFitnessPal. It's not by any means the best tracking software out there. I've just been using it forever. But all of the foods that I eat on a regular basis, once you've logged them a couple times, it remembers that these are common foods. And so once you do it, like you can program like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. All I have to do is hit that button and it logs the bread, the peanut butter, the jelly, like all of it. My breakfast every morning, hit one button, it logs all of it. You know what I mean? Because it's just the consistency in those habits. And so as you continually do it, it gets faster and you spend less and less time doing it so that it's not such a burden to pull your log out and track, this and that and this and that. If you're very consistent with your habits, tracking them is really not that hard.
Absolutely.
And it gets easier over time. And so that's something that people often don't get to that point where it becomes that habit, because we typically give up on things fairly quickly. New Year's resolutions, prime example of that.
By 3 weeks in, most New Year's people, it's over. And so, again, what we're trying to do here is give you tools so you can sustain these things and be successful, because we want you to be successful. And not do the same Groundhog Day, New Year thing over and over and over. Michael, I think our next one, as we're talking about like frequency, consistency, all these things.
Those are the things that matter. So when we're wanting to make this easy, some people are going to want to go to the nth degree. Like I do that because I'm a nerd and I'm a dietitian. Nutrition is kind of my thing. And I like a lot of numbers, so I can make graphs and stuff like that. You don't have to do that at all. But we're going to look at three things: frequency, consistency, and level of detail. Okay. So frequency is how often does an action take place? Like how often do you track? So a study of 10,000 individuals over 1,085 days showed that those who tracked food more frequently had better results than those who tracked more infrequently or less frequently.
Yeah.
And so frequency matters.
Yep.
So just like when you're weighing, if you weigh yourself once a month, you're probably not going to be able to analyze that data very effectively because there's just too much stuff going on in between those dates. So if your weight is up 1 month, but it was because, that weekend you ate tons and tons of salt and carbs compared to your norm, you could have had a downward trend that entire month and then just had 1 or 2 bad days in a row that led to the weight going back up.
Yeah.
And you're just going to think you're a failure. But if you looked at the data in between, you're missing so many points where you were succeeding that whole time. You just happen to weigh yourself on a bad day.
Yeah.
And so, the frequency does help. But what's more important than frequency is consistency.
Yes.
And so if you, so I'll give you the example. So and consistency just means doing it at the same time, like every time.
Yeah.
Right. So if you get up Monday morning and you weigh right after you go to the bathroom, and then you go next Monday, first thing in the morning, right after going to the bathroom, you weigh. And then the next Monday, that's consistency.
Yeah.
You're doing it the same way every time. And you're getting more reliable data across time, because chances are, even though you think that your week to week is very dynamic and variable, it's probably not as dynamic as you think. You probably do a lot of the same things all the time. That's just how we are. And so going at the same time every week, you're probably going to get pretty good data from that, even if it's not very frequent.
Yeah.
And so consistency actually matters more than frequency.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So level of detail, and that's going from, your food log, just writing down what you eat, versus tracking it in an app and counting your calories or counting your macronutrients, just however deep you want to go in that. That is the least important part of it. All those numbers and everything, because you really don't need all of those numbers to make good decisions based on that data, right? If you just write down your food and then watch what your weight does, you can look at your food log and say, okay, well, I ate ice cream 7 times last week.
Yeah.
I don't know how many calories and fat and all that is in there, but I'm pretty sure 7 times is probably too many.
Yeah.
So let me cut it back to 3 times and then see what happens. And then you weigh and your weight goes down a little bit, right? So I didn't have to track the calories in the ice cream and the fat and the sugar and it's not as necessary. Now, over time, as you lose a lot of weight and you have less weight to lose, and it requires a little bit more fine tuning, you might need to go into that level of detail. But by the time you get there, you're probably okay to go to that level of detail without it becoming overwhelming.
Right.
And so in the beginning, especially, keep it simple.
Absolutely.
Just be consistent with what you do and just keep it simple.
Yeah.
Do not overcomplicate it. The more complicated it gets, the harder it is to maintain that. And then we lose every time. Because if we quit, we lost.
Yeah, exactly. No, and I think, again, if anyone had learned anything from this whole podcast series, it's consistency is king.
It is.
And then number 2 is if we just ate less processed stuff, we would probably do better, right? And so
and there are a couple reasons for that, but continue.
Yeah. So it's one of those so even if you didn't track I ate this ice cream with this butter nut, and this is calculated to be 200 calories, whatever. Even if you just wrote ice cream, and like you said, you started saying we had ice cream, we had Chick-fil-A. I said, I don't eat out very often, and then you started tracking. We ate out 5 times this week. Just things like that will help. Again, with this, it's just now no wonder it's not working.
Yeah, it's just to make you more aware of what you do on a regular basis. Because when you just go about your day, you don't think about 90% of the stuff that you do.
Absolutely.
You really don't. And when you go to bed at night, you don't think about 99% of what you did.
Right.
You know what I mean? You might have had 1 to 10% of your day that was impactful, that you're like, man, that was weird.
Yeah.
Not necessarily weird, but weird enough to your brain to remember it.
Correct.
And so all the other stuff, you just kind of forget about it. And we just go through our week like that. So when you write it down and then you look at it, you're like, oh man, that I didn't, like you said, we ate out a lot more than I thought we did. And so it's just that awareness of what we're doing. We can identify things that we need to change so that then we can track and see where we're going and finally get to our destination.
Absolutely.
But we got to have that data. And so the conclusions, so the point of logging, like I said, trigger awareness so that you can make those incremental adjustments as you go. As you continue to implement actions, log, review, reflect, and adjust, the results will inevitably follow. Tracking is one very useful tool to let you know how you're doing so that you're not just navigating in the dark. It can help guide your behaviors and serve as the GPS system for your journey. And to summarize what matters, consistency over frequency, but both are important and lead to better outcomes. Details matter less than consistency or frequency. Initially, it takes time, but you get faster and more efficient the longer you do it. And information alone, this is one of the first things you said today, which is why I smiled. I always smile. You're always ahead of the game here. Information alone will never get us anywhere unless we're willing to analyze it, reflect on it, and use it to determine what our next steps are, and then actually implement those actions.
Yeah, exactly. It's not good enough just to know. You got to do something with that information.
Yeah, and so it's funny because it comes full circle. That last point that I had written down there was exactly what you said at the very beginning of this podcast. And I'm like, we're going to end it where we started.
There we go. So. Well, Michael, this was a fantastic episode. I think this was super helpful. I think our next one will be just a recap. Yeah,
we're just going to talk about the series because this is, like I said, this is the last kind of original content episode where we're breaking down new things or talking about new things. Next time, we're just going to review. I don't know if I might have like a bullet point thing, but no kind of sections or anything like that. And we'll just kind of talk about things and kind of review. It would be a great time that if you have not submitted questions and do have questions to send them in. What's the email address?
You actually just put it on our Facebook page or our YouTube. Put it on the comments. That's a lot easier.
Just submit questions and we can answer them next time. That'd be the best time to do it. Because after that, this series is done. And we're going to move on to the next one.
Move on a lot more.
Do a little bit of different things. Awesome. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, for sure, Michael. Thanks, man.
Absolutely. We'll see y'all next time.